All right. Good morning, Doug. A few things we can talk about today. One of a couple of them relate to conversations you had recently. One of which I was part of earlier this week with a person who has a little bit of insight on what's going on in Ukraine, kind of boots on the ground. It's a guy who represents a motorcycle gang called the Night Wolves. You want to tell our viewers about that?
Yeah. So there's a group that we both belong to, and one of the other members who actually runs something called ETIC for the world's best traveled people. People that have just for openness have been to over 100 countries or more. So uh, anyway, his name is Kolya. He's a German, and in the course of his travels, he's gotten to know the Night Wolves. Now, the Night Wolves are a Russian motorcycle club. We hate to say motorcycle gang
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
uh, because talking about motorcycle gangs, I got to know Sonny Barger reasonably well. I mean, it's not like we hung out together a lot, but we were friends. I visited him at his house, and he visited me, and blah, blah, blah. And Sonny always liked to say, we're not a gang, we're a motorcycle club. And the Night Wolves feel the same way about that. Uh, they've as Sven Svensson, he's the foreign minister of the Night Wolves, and the Night Wolves have, I think he said, 175 chapters around the world, which is quite a bit. Actually, I don't know how many the Hells Angels have, but unlike the Hells Angels, to be a Night Wolf, you can't deal in drugs, and you can't. What else did he say? Uh,
Prostitution, I think. Yeah,
yeah,
not prost. And then one other one I can't
yeah.
recall.
One other that. Well, you have to have basic values. You have to be kind of a believe in God or something. So I think that was part of it. None of these are requirements for the angels, but in any event, he impressed me. Was the foreign minister of the Night Wolves, and they're under sanctions by lots of Western European countries, and a number of their members as individuals are sanctioned. And apparently, the reason is that Putin is associated with the Night Wolves. He's gone to at least one, but apparently several of their get-togethers, and Putin is a motorcycle guy himself, which I think speaks very well of him. Quite frankly, can't can't imagine Barry Obama on a hog.
No chance.
He's just not that kind of guy. So anyway, kind of brought us up to date with what he thought was going on in the Ukraine and various other things. And if we ever go to Russia, we can certainly hang out with the wolves, thanks to Sven, which I think would be fun and interesting.
Certainly would. Certainly would. Could get you on a faster track to the bad guy list, though, which, based upon yeah, by association, for not to say they should be, the guy apparently, he and, like I said, a lot of other members are individually sanctioned now. And this guy was he was German, if I recall, and he left Germany 20 years ago, sort of, as he says, sitting and writing on the wall, and then, I guess emigrated to Russia and has spent a lot of time in the Donbass.
Exactly. And what he pointed out about Russia, this would shock Bubis Americanus, but he seemed to me like a straight up, decent, honest guy. In his regular life, he's he's a grade school teacher,
Yeah.
teaching English and German to Russian kids, and seemed like a really okay guy to me. Uh, so what was I going to say? Uh,
Well, I was talking about getting on the bad guy list by
oh,
association.
bad guy list. Yeah. Well, I don't think there's much doubt that almost anybody and everybody that has views like ours almost can't help getting on the bad guy list unless you just keep your mouth shut and hide in a closet. At this point, the Jacobins are going to be out hunting for us. And one of the things that I thought was very interesting is that he says that he feels much freer in Russia, just as an ordinary citizen, having nothing to do with his membership in the Night Wolves, than he did as a German. And I think he's right, because I had another friend who lived in Russia for many years and known quite well. And he said, no, everything here is, no secret police tailing you, none of that type of thing. I mean, there's problems with Russia to do with the fact that it's, but economic problems, but there's no political repression or anything of that nature. It may be, shockingly, in many ways, freer than the United States. Can't say, haven't lived there.
Well, and a couple things he recounted was, despite all the sanctions, there's never been any interruption in grocery stores in Russia. Gasoline prices are still incredibly cheap for the average Russian. Shortages, which people have experienced in different places in Europe, just did not happen, at least not in his experience outside in Moscow at all.
Yeah, Americans are so used to conflating today's Russia with the old Soviet Union, and that's a mistake because I've been to Russia, I don't know, half a dozen times probably, but I was also in the old Soviet Union when I went to both Moscow and Leningrad in the early 1980s. And my impression of the place in those days was that it was really tightly controlled, and food was crappy, and as tourists, you were regimented as part of an in-tourist group. But you were being watched. There's little doubt about that in my mind. And standard of living was extremely low, and it was a pretty bad place. I mean, like, for instance, I remember when we flew from Moscow to Leningrad, our airliner was an old Ilyushin converted bomber. How did I know it was a converted bomber? Because it had the observation domes. It was on airliners. So it was a very different place then, and I think Russia has very much transformed itself, frankly. So that was interesting. If you're looking for a place to go and live, I tried to convince my wife, how long ago was this? 6, 7 years ago, that we ought to live in the Congo, in Kinshasa, for 6 months, and then go to live in Moscow for 6 months. If I'd said Leningrad, I might have been able to push her over the edge, or St. Petersburg, as it were. And it actually would have been smart, I think, from both points of view, because I would have gotten to know everybody that was important, certainly in the Congo, and I think in Russia too, quite frankly. And, one thing that would be really worthwhile talking to Putin about, if it's possible to talk to him, very hard today, of course, is that there's a part of Russia which is separated from the rest of Russia, called Kaliningrad, separated by the Polish corridor. And maybe it's never occurred to Putin that they ought to make that place a magnet, like a free market tax and business haven right in the middle of the EU, that would give a very good impression for Russia in general and would draw people from all over the world if it was a real free market and tax haven in Kaliningrad, which they can't do anything with because it's physically separated from the rest of the country. I think it's a great idea. Might be tougher today, but it'll be worth any place that you set up as a real free market and tax haven would work. I think anywhere in the world, people would go there because there are a lot of South African farmers that are being attracted to Russia because obviously at this point, if you're a white guy, you really got to get out of South Africa because things are just going the wrong way. The place is falling apart, and you know, other natives. I mean, you can't say the natives because the white people are just as native to South Africa as the black people are, quite frankly, as far as when they arrived, at least in the Cape. But I think it's a great idea, and it would work. So it's actually wouldn't be a bad place to live. The fact that we're looking possibly at something resembling World War III, okay, it would have been better in the before times, no question about that.
No, that's awesome. It's an awesome idea.
And that I don't know if there's anything else we want to say about Sven, but then yesterday or the day before, I had a conversation with Saifedean Ammous. And last time we were on, I showed his book, which is extraordinarily, unusually well-written economics book. But he's famous for having written
the Bitcoin Standard.
Bitcoin Standard. That's the name of his book, which has been translated into 37 different languages, which is really a big number. So I was on his podcast and we talked for an hour and a half. And it was about Bitcoin and so forth. So I guess you can find it on YouTube.
Yeah, I'll find it. I'll link to it in the description if it's published already.
Yeah. But one of the things that we talked about is he's a well-traveled guy. He's a Palestinian by background. And so I asked him, so what do you think the best places in the world to be are right now? And I'll tell you what he said. And I thought they were very interesting observations because we've talked about this in the past. He said Dubai and El Salvador. Now, those are two very different places, but it's very interesting because the whole financial world is gravitating away from London and Paris and New York for lots of reasons. I mean, the West is a sinking ship. So where are they going? They're going to where all the wealth is and where financial freedom is. And it's true. Dubai is pretty tightly regulated place, but if you don't engage in common law crime, it's actually really neat. I mean, as a Westerner there, you're not going to be afflicted with all these silly Mohammedan rules, slightly inconvenienced, perhaps. You're not going to be drinking an open container on the street. Okay, that's the social
Can't
norm.
do that in most of the U.S. Can't do that in the U.S.
Yeah, exactly. But otherwise, it's I think it's a delightful place to live. And interestingly, property prices in Dubai, which have fluctuated radically in the past, are now at all-time highs. Because everybody with money and that's kind of the center of the world, population-wise. It's as close as you can get to being the center of the world, population-wise, is moving there. And so that is an interesting possibility for people.
Just as a little anecdote about the how the laws do work there is that, and I just saw this on Twitter the other day. So there's some woman who was a social media influencer who was in Dubai, and apparently the rental car attendee was not, doing what she wanted in the way she wanted it. So she apparently went a little crazy yelling at the person, but all she did was yell. But she's facing 2 years in jail for causing the disruption that she caused. You can't.
Well, most of the influencers you see here think they're extraordinarily special and bigger
Exactly.
and have a right to, boss everybody else around. So, yeah, I think 2 years of time for being impolite and just a nasty creep, I think that's going overboard. But on the other hand, she probably had it coming, quite frankly.
I know. I have totally mixed feelings about it. Like I love
Uh,
I,
I,
it was,
but unless you're a total asshole, I think it would be a very acceptable and very pleasant place to live,
that's what I've
and
heard.
very free. So anyway, I said, okay, that's interesting. And I failed to mention, and the other place that is in a similar situation is Singapore. I've never been a fan of Singapore in the past. I always saw it as government housing development next to an oil refinery. That's no longer true. That's the past. And once again, it's very tightly wrapped, and you've got to be decently behaved. But if you are, there's zero crime in either place.
Yep.
You don't have to worry about crime. So, and that's a big consideration for people. And you got lots of financial freedom, and you got a high standard of living. And okay, I mean, neither place is a libertarian idyll, but in today's world, pretty good.
Yeah. And what about El Salvador? How does that fit in?
Well, Safe is a friend and a leading consultant to uh, is it Nayib Bukele,
Yeah.
who's also a Palestinian background, who's the
Oh,
president of El Salvador. And Bukele has become something of a model, something of a hero throughout Latin America, where all over Latin America, where they have problems, people are going out of their way to demonstrate for him and so forth. And why? He's done two things that are interesting in El Salvador, which I would have thought was the least likely place in the Western, well, certainly in Latin America, to have reformed. I mean, it's a overpopulated, crappy little country where their main export has been people for many years, especially these two things have. MS-13, and there's another one. I forgot the name of it. But crime is a major problem in El Salvador, where the various gangsters are killing mostly each other, just like in the inner cities, blacks are mostly killing each other. Well, the gangsters are mostly killing each other. But he's locked up 65,000 gang members. I guess it's pretty easy to tell who they are because they're all heavily tattooed and to identify who they belong to in that. But he's thrown them in prison. And of course, all the liberals around the world are up in arms because you can't violate these people's rights. But, the crime level in El Salvador has fallen 90%. And it's actually changed. I mean, what Safe said was in El Salvador in the past, and I never walked down the streets in the capital in the past when I was there, so I can't testify, but I think he's probably right. He said the streets were deserted and the commerce was dead. The gangs were hustling and shaking down merchants. And, it was just a nightmare. Forget about the actual murder rate and the violence. So he locked up all these people, the mano duro, the hard hand, and, the society's been transformed. And in answer to the question, well, how are these people going to be tried, and when are they going to get out? And his basic answer is, so we'll figure it out, and if they want leniency, God will give them that. But in the meantime, they have to answer for the bad things that they've done here and now. Well, okay, under the circumstances, that's very reasonable. The other interesting thing, and the reason why Safe hooked up with Bukele, says I guess Safe is kind of he's a PhD economist and all this type of thing, is that Bukele has made Bitcoin legal tender in El Salvador. which is a very good idea because it's a way of getting out of the Swiss system and get out from under the thumb of the U.S. dollar, which is actually the official currency in El Salvador. Uh, so this is excellent too, and it's another reason why liberals and government officials around the world basically hate him. But he's immensely popular among the El Salvadorian people, and maybe there will be a reverse immigration now after time, where Salvadorians, which are mostly in the U.S., start flowing back to Salvador.
Very interesting. Yeah. And is he does Safe where does he live now?
He doesn't advertise it, but he lives, I guess, mostly in Lebanon, which he also feels is at the point of experiencing a renaissance, because the place has become so dysfunctional that like a third of the population works for the government, and a government job became a scam for Hezbollah, which really controls things, where they got you a government job and then you work for Hezbollah. It's a good way to do it. I mean, that way you don't have the payroll; the government's got the payroll. But
Yeah.
they use
The
that.
night wolves should learn from this. I think this is a more effective system than what they're doing. Short term.
That's 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 right. So anyway, Safe made the point that maybe maybe Salvador, after enough time goes by, so you can change elements of the culture, people don't get used to living a kind of a decent life as opposed to dodging criminals all day. It'll transform itself. It's got very nice beaches, and so it might work. And I brought up to him that yeah, things can change radically. I mean, if you look at Dubai, it was a nothing place. I mean, it had an airport the size of a small town that just barely had an airport in the U.S. When I first went through it, there was nothing there, nothing. And now it's one of the most developed places on the planet. And it happened all in the course of 40 years. I mean, it's as radical as what's happened in China, which went from backward ox cart, dirt floors to one of the most. So this can happen, but it could work in the other direction, because I pointed out that Port-au-Prince, Haiti, used to be one of the safest, and believe it or not, for a backward place with lots of problems that kept it backward, nicest places in the world back in the days of Papa Doc. Yeah, it was a police state with the Tonton Macoute keeping order. But, if you were a tourist there, you were sacrosanct. They wouldn't dare touch you under any circumstances. And if you were a tourist, that was okay. And if you were, it was a criminal group, the Tonton Macoute, but, it was a criminal group that wasn't stupidly destructive. I mean, they served a purpose. So now the place is just, it personifies shithole. I mean, I actually thought, gee, I wouldn't mind living here in Haiti and starting a diving business, which is what I wanted to do at that time in my life. So things can change radically in today's world.
As an ANCAP, as somebody who basically doesn't believe that, the state really has a right to exist, we talk about all of these countries from Singapore, Dubai, El Salvador. It's the state is very involved in that and keeping order, keeping, lots of rules basically. And if you violate them, there are very serious consequences. So how do you explain that these situations can be more desirable than others, even though the state is much more harsh?
Well, the state is always the worst entity to enforce these rules, I think. and it's the most dangerous predator out there. And the reason for that is that they have a legal monopoly of force. Other groups, whether it would be the Pinkertons and the 100 years ago U.S., or whether it be a group like the mafia. I'm not recommending the mafia, but I've got to say that except for the shakedowns and all this type of thing, mafia-dominated areas of the big cities are really safe. There's no street crime. That's not the game they play. So, the average person that lives there, if he's of the right ethnic descent, certainly, doesn't have a problem. He's not being shaken down. Things are safe and normal and so forth. And years ago, there was an organization in New York called the Guardian Angels, run by a guy named Curtis Sliwa. And I never succeeded in getting Curtis to come to the Era Society, which we used to run in Aspen, and we used to have all kinds of people like that. I mean, not guardian angel types, but personalities that were doing something in the world. And, they were very effective during the high crime era in New York. So you don't need the government to do these things. It's like asking a Soviet citizen 50 years ago. You asked him, well, you don't really need this stupid government. And he would say, well, if we didn't have the government, who'd make our shoes? Make our cars? Like he was like, got you. And they actually think that way. And that's the same thing. Well, who will make the police? Who will provide the courts? It's the same thing.
But fundamentally, there's the whole power abhors a vacuum. The reality is there's like some kind of organized control of most territory.
Yeah. Reality exists, and sometimes reality is really just unacceptable. So you have to do something. And sometimes that's unpleasant. I mean, there's just no way around it sometimes. If you have a cancer in your leg, sometimes you have to cut off your leg. And it's not advisable. It's not welcome. It's not pleasant. But I hate to see something like that as a libertarian. But it's something. If a thief invades your house, I don't like the idea of killing somebody, but maybe you got to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I'm just looking to see if there's anything else that you want to talk about.
There was one thing that relates to this, I think. It's that there was a poll taken recently that I just read this morning, actually, that kind of put together migration patterns. I mean, we're talking about international migration patterns where, it might have been interesting to go to Russia. Maybe it still is interesting to go to Dubai, maybe El Salvador, if you think the trend will stay in motion, so forth. But in the U.S., there's a very massive and noticeable movement of high-income people. This was what this particular poll was looking at, leaving the Northeast, in particular New York and Massachusetts and Washington, D.C., of all places. Those are mostly government employees and people sopping on the government and people living on the people that are living on the government. But nonetheless, for high-income people, D.C. is suffering a drain. And at the same time, these people all seem to be concentrating, going to Florida and Texas and places that, are culturally, maybe not tax-wise, but still culturally desirable, like Idaho. Is an example that they gave.
Right. Interesting. It's a big trend reversal for the DC, though.
Yeah, I lived in DC for a long time, actually, because half of my family is from DC. The other half is from Chicago. And it used to be that that DC was full of Black people that were living on welfare. And then, as the government became more powerful and more important, there were all kinds of yuppies that moved in. And so it's very funny what happened in D.C. At first, the black people in D.C. were whining and moaning about all these honkies are coming into town. They're driving up rents. I can't afford to live here anymore. They all had to move out to Prince George's County, awful place, but outside of D.C. Because the whites were forcing them out, driving up rents, gentrifying the place. And it started going into reverse. And, they whined when the whites came in, and now that the whites are leaving, they're whining again. I mean, so the inner city blacks have been totally corrupted and culturated to expect something for nothing, to be treated as a kind of a privileged class. We want reparations. And no matter what these stupid honkies do, they're doing the wrong thing. And it's to hurt us. That's what's on their minds, to hurt us. So it's really too bad. And they don't realize that what's really the biggest enemy of black people, more than any other class in the U.S., is the government. I mean, they absolutely destroyed the culture of black Americans, put them on welfare. They stacked them up in vertical ghettos. I mean, it's absolutely criminal what the U.S. government has done. And it all started getting really bad, starting with the Johnson administration, with this Great Society, which really put all that into hyperdrive. So anyway.
Great society. Great society.
Great society. Yeah. Well, it was warfare and welfare is what the Johnson administration was all about. And when I was in Georgetown, the time when Johnson got elected over Goldwater, I was so naive. I thought, when they were announcing, I was so naive politically, because I read Goldwater's Conscience of a Conservative, and I said, this guy's right. I mean, and he was a decent human being, who incidentally, I'll mention this because it's true. I actually met Goldwater and shook his hand where? In Port-au-Prince, Haiti, at the Hotel Olafsen.
Really?
Yep. There he was at the next table at the Olafsen, which has probably been torn down or, overrun with poor people. And, it's probably not a hotel anymore, but there he was, and I shook hands with him, and it was very nice. So, Port-au-Prince. But anyway, what was I going to say about...
You were saying about how naive you were politically.
How naive I was, yes. So there it was on election night in 1964, and they're announcing how the state of Alaska, Goldwater, Alabama, Goldwater, Arizona, Goldwater. And I said, God, maybe he can win. He certainly should win. And those were about the only states that voted. Meanwhile, all my classmates at Georgetown, stupid chimpanzees as they were all hooting and panting, cheering for Johnson. I mean, it's just criminally stupid, and Johnson went on to almost destroy the country.
All right. Well, with that, Doug, I think we'll wrap it up for today. Thanks, Doug. I appreciate it. We'll be back.
Thanks, man.